just kind of talk about how Copilot has influenced everything else related to M365.
You mean there is something else?
Yes, I hear it replaces PowerShell. Todd's going to be so disappointed.
Here we are on Wednesday, May 15th for Ask and Practice. A few of us are here and a few are away. Derek and Julie are at ECP this week, but the rest of the gang is all here.
ECT is a different kind of treatment than they're getting. ECS.
ECS. All right.
ECS.
It's that menopause thing we were talking about.
Get you in many ways.
Today's topic, we're talking about Microsoft 365 Community Conference from a couple of weeks ago. The only one of our group that is here that was actually present was Carrie, but certainly everybody has something to say about it. So the goal today is just to kind of go over a recap of that, starting with Copilot, and just kind of talk about how Copilot has influenced everything else related to M365.
You mean there is something else?
Yes, I hear it replaces PowerShell. Todd's going to be so disappointed.
Oh, no.
Now, I do use AI in PowerShell, so I'm trying to, mix the chocolate and the peanut butter.
Yeah. So let's see, Copilot Studio. I believe it was available on a limited basis before, but now it's fully available as of the conference. And so it's the old Power Virtual Agents thing rebranded as Copilot Studio. Not everything's available yet, but it's there. It's something that you can start building Copilot-driven solutions with. And the licensing, we read through some of the articles and tried to understand exactly what the licensing was. You have to license the Copilot Studio itself for $200 a month, which gets you a certain number of messages. But then every user who wants to partake in the custom Copilot you create also has to have a Copilot license. So it could add up rather quickly if you're not sort of all in on Copilot already. But that was a pretty big thing, so that we can start really building bespoke solutions that ingest or talk to the Copilot driven services.
Okay,
let's get into
that's all
I got to say about that.
Let's get into the nitty gritty of the recap.
So
there we get the roadmap, the SharePoint sites to Microsoft Stream.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of stuff that's been coming for a while for SharePoint that either launched as of the conference or is now available. Some of the things that we thought we'd highlight for this crew, section backgrounds is one that we've all at some practice discussed at length, where instead of having 4 variations on the theme colors, you now have something like 16. And that could be a good thing, but it also is something that you probably want to be careful that you don't overuse, so that you just have some sort of crazy color mixtures. But that's available in the product now. Image text overlay enhancements is the ability to put images into pages and change their shape just by picking a selector. So you could have an image that turns triangular or circular or as a square if it's of a different shape. There's some accessibility issues with that we're hoping that they will fix, but those shapes are there. And you can also add text overlay that works a little bit better than has. Anybody on the Simpraxis team have things to say about that stuff?
Like you mentioned with the section backgrounds, I know we've talked about it a little bit internally too, where I was demoing the background shading for someone, and as soon as I opened it up, I said, you have these 4 options, and then there were all of a sudden these 16 options, and they were all excited and lit up about, oh, I can do all these things. And obviously we don't want it to be the Wild West, and you want to kind of stick to what's going to be cohesive and consistent across, the different sites. But I could see some use for that on pages where maybe you don't want as deep of a header image at the top. You could potentially use a section with a little more personality and a little more flair, maybe for certain types of pages. So I think it's not completely terrible. I mean, it's got some good options to it, but yeah, I feel like once people see that, they'll tend to use that in all different ways on all different pages, and kind of the consistency and that governance somewhat goes out the window. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag, I think, as far as the section
I mean,
backgrounds.
I sort of feel the same way about this as I do about most things in SharePoint. It's content, content, content. And if you want to make that content look good, that's great. But that's already like 4 considerations away, right? Let's make sure that we have the right stuff on pages or in documents to actually help people do their jobs better. And if we want to make it look pretty, that's nice.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I think it definitely emphasizes the need and desire for certain organizations to have the governance committees as well. So there's someone actually going into the pages and saying, your first and level tier pages need to look this way, but if you want to go, hog wild on your third tier, have at it, or use it on your team sites, things like that. Personally, I feel like this is geared towards the Gen X and millennials who are reminiscing these days about their MySpace pages where they can have splashes of colors and fun shapes.
Spinning
away
fire.
from the clean modern look that we've been moving towards on a lot of sites these days. But
yeah, I'll say even. Oh, go ahead, Mark.
I was going to say that Brand Center is another sort of extension of that. Let's give people more flexibility on how they display things in SharePoint. The Brand Center is it's on this slide. It's coming soon. I think on one of the other slides it says that it's already there. It's there in some tenants, and
we're
the Brand
discussing
Center
next week.
And that's right. We won't talk about it much today, but because of that. But in 2 weeks we'll actually have a session just on that. But it does at this point give you custom fonts. That's in that coming soon item in the middle. Sorry, Carrie, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to come back to just a couple more of these, the image shapes and the advanced editing capabilities, just playing around with some of that too. Again, same thing. You can kind of go a little crazy. I think in certain spots, maybe one image on a page, having that slightly different shape is a little more stylistic. I mean, with SharePoint, it does tend to seem very square and boxy, all the images, the headers and all that. So it can kind of lighten things up and soften some of those edges a little bit, I think.
Agreed.
Yeah, and then, just being able to do some of those editing tweaks of images right within the web part is super helpful, and even adding some of those filters that you might want to use that you're used to from your iPhone or whatever, you could kind of jazz things up a tiny bit. So it does make it a little more convenient to personalize and customize some of that stuff more than it used to. So
I sort of feel like some of this stuff is it's things we've been able to do in platforms like WordPress for a very long time, and so it's bringing some more of that sort of consumer-ish formatting breadth into SharePoint.
Yep.
And another one that's worth mentioning is pages co-authoring, which is coming up. So, if Carrie and I are working on a page together, we don't have to say, okay, now you type that and put in that section, and then when you're done, let me know. We can actually be working concurrently in the same page, which I think especially as more and more people are, more people are continuing to work remotely, that pages co-authoring experience is actually going to be very helpful to maintain content in sites. And then there's a Copilot in there somewhere, and then there's another Copilot in there somewhere. So we're going to be able to ask Copilot to do all kinds of things for us in SharePoint very soon.
Yep.
I think that's all we had that we wanted to call out on that one, right?
How
think
about
so.
OneDrive and lists?
I think one of the more interesting things that was announced recently and is now available, if it's in your tenant, it's not in all the tenants that I see, is that Forms in Microsoft Lists option. So think of that as a combination of Microsoft Forms and custom list forms, sort of in the middle of that. So we sort of get the capabilities, some of the capabilities that are in Microsoft Forms that make a list form feel a little bit more sort of modern and robust, but it's also connected to that lists schema. So it knows about the list. It understands what kind of columns those list columns are, and it generates the form based on that. I've seen it, and I've seen demos of it and stuff. I still haven't been able to touch it in a tenant where I needed to do something with it. So I'm not quite sure how well it goes with the list life cycle. If we were to add some columns and take some columns away and all that stuff, how that form reacts. But I think that's going to be really powerful, especially because we can send people a link to that form, have them enter data into it, and they don't have to see the list at all. It can be totally decoupled from the list, much like Microsoft Forms can. But you don't have to build a flow to get the data back in. That connection is there.
And from what I understand, you can do multiple forms off that one list too. So you can kind of like repurpose it for different things, different fields you might want to show. Maybe you're trying to get some idea generation going, and you may not want people to see, some of those other ideas or something like that. You can kind of customize it, which is nice. And then you can shut off those responses. So like for like maybe a voting type period of time, or something like that, a registration period, you can then shut those responses off, which I think is a nice little, feature to be able to shut that off for the time being. So it does look cool. I haven't used it yet though either, but it does seem pretty.
It's yet another
yeah.
option, in a broad spectrum of options we have to collect information from people and then store it somewhere. We have simple list forms. We have all kinds of options, from the most simple to bespoke Power Apps and even custom solutions. So there's so many options in there. I think the key for most organizations is going to be to figure out what the criteria are they want to use to decide which way to go on those options.
Yep.
So
that permission thing is great though.
Is that going to be on an Asks and Praxis roadmap? Using those?
Using the forms in Microsoft Lists?
Yeah.
As a session for Asks and Praxis?
Yeah.
I think it should be, now that you've asked.
I think it should be.
Not as soon as we all feel like we have something that we can say other than it looks really cool.
Well, the fact that the permissions are separate is huge, right? Like that's the big thing. That's the common problem we all have, is like, we need everybody to be able to fill this thing out and then not really be able to see what everybody else filled out. So I think that'll be super helpful.
Well, and hopefully the ability to limit which fields are shown on a particular form for people in a particular class, and then, dare I ask, cascading drop-down lists. Oh my God, that's too much to ask.
It's amazing. It's amazing how long it's been that hasn't existed.
I know.
Given almost every form has some need for it.
Right. How core to most custom development it is.
Laura has a question about, well, not a question so much as an observation, that the forms on list doesn't honor branching, and she's given us a link to go vote on a piece of feedback. So you should I'll do that for Laura. I think that there's probably, those are the kinds of functionality gaps that we get in these various options, which might drive us to different decisions.
All right. Have anything else on the OneDrive?
Looking to see if we missed anything that we wanted to talk about here. Oh, branded external file requests. I don't know if anybody's used those. Request a file in OneDrive. It's a way to, maybe you have a job candidate who you want to have upload their resume and maybe a couple other things. You can send them a request for files, and they can then just click the link and upload to a place where they can only see that spot where you're uploading it. Now you're going to be able to start branding those external file requests so that they don't look like they're spoofing or phishing or whatever they're they're going to look more like they come from your actual organization, which probably will help that functionality with adoption.
Yeah, and I think you can use that on SharePoint lists now. I think they expanded that because initially it was just OneDrive, but I think it's in SharePoint now.
Yeah. And
All your
colored
PIIs
folders.
belong to us.
Colored folders in Windows Explorer. Let's put it in the red one. What does red mean? We don't know. But I think, with stuff like that, we are seeing, that tight coupling between what Microsoft 365 does and what the Windows team does, which is something that started happening, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago, where before that it would never have happened. So that's a good thing that Microsoft is doing, keeping those teams close together.
All right.
What
Advanced
next?
Content management.
This is an interesting set of stuff because it came out of
There it is.
it came out of what was called Microsoft Syntax or SharePoint Syntax before that. And these are enhanced content management tools that in a lot of ways are being framed as being necessary and or useful in the context of Copilot. Surprise, surprise. So, people's information architecture and information security and permission management all of a sudden is really, really important because Copilot is going and rooting around in everybody's content and seeing stuff, just like search has been doing for years. So some of these advanced content management tools are in service of that kind of thinking, and others are full-fledged solutions on their own. So for example, the agreement solution, which I think of as contracts, is actually a turnkey solution to help an organization manage contracts through their life cycle. I think that that's a very powerful solution set. It's one that a lot of third parties have done very well with, offering solutions for years. So Microsoft has gotten into that game. So that's a solution-oriented solution around advanced content management. It's a specific set of use cases that Microsoft is seeing as valuable to offer a product. When it comes to things like AI-driven doc processing, that is really, to me, that's the extension of what Syntax was doing, where it was doing machine learning and pulling data out of individual documents as you added them into the repo. Now, Copilot is starting to come into that process as well. We're also seeing a new e-signature capability come in the context of advanced content management. So it's Microsoft's solution to DocuSign and Adobe Sign and things like that. They have their own native solution that was, I think that was announced at the conference, but then they're also integrating with third-party solutions as well. And then we have some specific things that, again, I think are almost in service of Copilot exclusively, like a restricted access control policy, which is it's sort of it's a separate way to permission sites so that you can sort of close them, or actually, if you enable it, you're closing off all your sites to Copilot, and then you can whitelist, I think it's 100 sites for Copilot to be able to rummage around in. So it's, in a sense, a Band-Aid for the permission holes that we've had all along. So if you're paying attention to your permissions and you're thinking about your information architecture, you're actually prepping for Copilot in a way that some of these tools are trying to help you do. It's like the permission state report, the site access review, which those two are in preview. And then some of the policies that are coming out with advanced content management, like inactive sites, which start to help you manage the life cycle of sites in a way that the platform hasn't done before. So there's actually a lot of goodness in here. It's additional licensing fees. But for any organization that takes content management seriously, I think it's something that you should seriously be looking at. And it will only evolve, I think, as not just as Copilot comes into the mix, but as they refine some of these solutions, like the agreement solution. You see it. It's got a span here that where it's going to be improved over time. Excuse me.
I can see where the sharing report and just being able to, at a glance, get some insight into things that are overshared, and are they like important, high value kind of content for your company and things like that. That might be really helpful to be able to sort of minimize whatever risks that might be associated with that. So I think it's good.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I mean permission management is hard, and it's hard because the feature set is very complex to allow lots and lots of different scenarios. But even if you're looking at just one document and trying to figure out who has access to it, it's hard to figure that out. You've got individual rights, you've got group-based rights, you've got links that have been shared, and Microsoft's, I think, historical take has always been, well, share when you need to. It's great. And the problem is that opens things up, and then it never closes them up. You know, we have time limits on links, but we don't. You know, a lot of us don't use them. So we end up with things that are pretty broadly or more broadly available than may make sense. And now Copilot again is looking in those nooks and crannies and highlighting that. So, I mean, no different than what search would have done for us in the past, but we wouldn't necessarily have, you know, it wouldn't have been as overt if we found it via search.
I feel like the ability to share is almost too easy. It's like it's just the shortest shortcut to get something to somebody, and it's always, you know, it comes with that little grain of salt where maybe it's permissions to the site and not just sharing the page or whatever it might be. But yeah, I feel like those are the easy ones. They're really generally right in your face and easy to do, which could have consequences.
Yeah, and as someone who spent years, maybe a decade, telling people don't do item level permissions in SharePoint, knowing every time somebody even looks at that sharing link, it breaks inheritance and creates just.
Yeah, exactly.
Gives me the willies.
Well, it's fantastic when it just in the normal course of things, it works and it does the thing that you need to do. But somebody ought to be coming by with a broom behind you,
yeah,
and cleaning up, and that's what some of these tools are doing.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure we could spend much more time talking about that because
we could.
We've all had issues with that. But we do have one more talking point here for the platforms and extensibility that we want to make sure to hit before we finish up here.
When I looked at this, I mean, it's sort of one of the top messages was that the SharePoint framework really is the app what do we call it? App development thing. What do we call all those previous efforts that we had to build apps? Anyway,
recycle.
Well, we've seen development frameworks. That's what it was. Development frameworks come and go with Microsoft, and you know, we used to joke that every 2 years they'd come out with a new one. SharePoint framework has now been around for, I don't know, 6 or 7 years, maybe even longer, and it just keeps getting more and more breadth in what it can offer. So I'm surprised that they haven't done it yet, but I've expected for years that they'll rename it the Microsoft framework as a way to build on top of many parts of their infrastructure. So that framework continues to expand. It's becoming more and more modernized, and there's some very specific things in here that maybe some of you wouldn't care about much, but things like getting up to more recent versions of Node.js and TypeScript only make that development tool set more accessible to your average developer, because it's building with some of the common web development tools that everybody has learned out there for a good long time. So those enhancements are only going to keep that development framework alive for a longer time. There are consistent improvements coming out with that. And then you see that there are also some extensions with things like, or enhancements coming out with things like adaptive card extensions, where you're going to be able to do more with those than you have in the past, more flexibility in what structure they have, what they look like, how you can build them, what they can do. Todd, do you see anything in here that, you're Mr. Platform guy, right?
I've used the word substrate in conversation.
I heard you say that one time. Yeah.
Yeah. I may have even.
I think you bit your
correctly.
tongue that day.
This is what. So we internally discuss a lot of times. When something's coming out, because we hear stuff from different places. I think everything that we've talked about. I think we've covered everything that I would have talked about.
Okay. I thought it was interesting on the far right where SharePoint Brand Center is in top of mind under extensibility. The SharePoint Brand Center, which we will talk about in a couple of weeks, right now is beginning to be a place where you can store common imagery and fonts. It's going to go further than that. So, we'll talk more about it then. But I found it interesting that it was on this slide out there.
Yeah.
More to come.
Okay. Any last thoughts before we move on to the resources here?
Just that I think just Copilot and the whole AI end of things was just really the focus of the conference. I mean, I guess just how those things sort of trickle into collaboration and content management and how that's continuing to evolve. I think it'll be interesting to see.
Did you go to a session where they didn't say Copilot?
I don't think so. I will say, though, some of the things that were good takeaways from the individual sessions were a lot of folks put up different prompts to use for Copilot, things that you might not necessarily have thought up on your own. So like things like understanding the decisions made in a Teams meeting after the call in a table, and what are the pros and cons, and what were the heated moments around some of those discussions. You can get some insight with Copilot. So there was things I wouldn't have thought to do as far as prompts go, especially with Teams and summarizing meetings. And even before the meetings, there were a lot of good ways to sort of prompt for, who else should be attending? Are there any interesting agenda items that we should talk about based on the last few calls? So there was some really good nuggets, I think, sprinkled around, but most of them were really AI and Copilot related. So it was good.
That's interesting. That's for sure. Okay, a couple of resources, some what's new in Copilot and the M365 Community Conference keynote link for those who weren't able to attend. Next Ask Some Praxis, May 29th, we'll be discussing, as we've been saying throughout this one, Brand Center, certainly up there with Copilot, although not getting quite as much attention, maybe from us, but not necessarily out there. Be sure to visit us live if you are at the European Collab Summit now, which we just heard from someone who took a moment to step in, Casper. TechCon 365 in June. Derek will be there. TechCon 365 DC, which is Derek, Mark, and Julie. And then Collab Days New England, where I think we will all be there. We're calling out for speakers now, so be sure to reach out and check that out if you are interested in attending and or speaking. I think that about wraps it up for us, unless anyone has any last thoughts.
Copilot.
What's that?
Oh, Copilot.
Does Mike's Otter have a co-pilot? That's so Mike's Otter has a pilot.
And no, it's an empty seat to the right.
Well, thank you everyone for coming. We certainly appreciate it, and we look forward to chatting with you all in a couple weeks on Brand Center.
Thanks, folks.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much for joining us this week on Ask Some Praxis. We love getting your questions or session ideas. You can submit by using the link in About. If you find this helpful, hit that like or subscribe button and share this content with your colleagues.